The London North Eastern Railway was famous for many reasons, but the biggest reason of all might just be Nigel Gresley's A1 Pacific locomotives. Sleek, fast and reliable, they became the poster child of the railway, heading many of their important mainline services and setting several speed records. This raises the question then, if the A1s were so good, why not make an A2? As it turned out, they did. And they sucked. By 1920, many of the railway companies in Britain were losing money. With over 120 companies all across the country, competition between them made services quite inefficient, and as such the government passed the 1921 Railway Act to amend this. The idea being to amalgamate the railways into 4 major companies. One of these was to be the London North Eastern Railway, which would operate along the east coast of the country, and among the railways that were to make up the company was the North Eastern Railway. To make the grouping process easier, one of the amalgamated railways would become the dominant company, making it so the other absorbed railways would have to adopt their practices. The Great Western Railway, for example, held control over the rest of the railways they merged with, and the Midland Railways management were the ones to primarily dictate the London Midland Scottish Railway. The North Eastern was one of the more well-to-do railways, and their chief mechanical engineer, Sir Vincent Raven, was keen to ensure that it would be the North Eastern that had the majority control over the newly forming LNER, by showing they could keep up with demand. In need of some more powerful locomotives to deal with the growing passenger traffic, Raven began designing a bigger version of his Z-Class Atlantic engines in 1922, with the goal of producing his own Pacific locomotives. At the same time, Chief Mechanical Engineer of the Great Northern Railway, Nigel Gresley, was working on his own Pacifics, and in April 1922 the first of his A1 class had been built. With all the publicity around these new express engines, Raven needed to produce an engine that could compete with the Great Northern competition. And by December that same year, Darlington Works had built the first of Raven's Pacific locomotives. These were a pair of 4 6.2s with 6-foot 8-inch driving wheels, 3 19 by 26-inch cylinders, Stephenson valve gear, a massive 6-foot diameter boiler capable of producing 200 psi, a massive firebox, superheater, and the engine alone had a wheelbase of over 37 feet. Classified as the A2s and numbered 2400 and 2401, both engines entered service in 1923, by which point the LNER had officially been formed. With Raven reaching retirement age, the role of Chief Mechanical Engineer was offered to Gresley, who took up office in February 1923. Shortly before that, however, 3 more A2s were ordered from Darlington Works, likely without Gresley's knowledge and possibly as a final act of rebellion on the North Eastern's behalf. Naturally, upon entering service, comparisons between Raven's engines and Gresley's A1s were drawn, and despite the A2's impressive stature, they ended up falling short. At first, they proved to be capable of keeping up with the A1s, not only able to match their performance, but steamed even easier than the A1s and could maintain their boiler pressure much better. This performance, however, came at a great fuel cost, as they had to burn more coal to keep up with their counterparts. High coal consumption wasn't their only issue though. Thanks to their layout, there was little space for the valve gear, which meant they had to be fitted with smaller bearings to make up for it, which weren't quite fit for the job. But the biggest issue with the A2s was their size. The size of the firebox meant it had to be positioned behind the driving wheels, making the overall length of the boiler much longer than it needed to be. Their size resulted in them having a very limited route availability compared to the A1s, and while they could still work on the East Coast main line between York and Edinburgh just fine, they simply didn't have the same flexibility as Gresley's engines. Simply put, the A1s were more compact, compounded, modern, and performed much better than the A2s. If anything, their simple cylinders, Stephenson valve gear, and parallel boilers made them look quite old-fashioned compared to the complex, tapered appearance of the competition. So much for showing the North Eastern was up to date. In fairness to Raven, however, the A2s weren't a passion project, but more of a last-minute reaction to the A1s. By 1922, Raven had successfully electrified the Shildon-Middlesbrough line and had produced a 464 electric express locomotive with the intention of electrifying the Northeastern's main line too. The grouping process, however, put these plans on hold, and the LNER cancelled the electrification scheme entirely by the end of 1923. With the railway having nothing to show for itself going into the merger, Raven started work on his Pacifics hoping to stay ahead of the curve, and had to rush the design and construction process in order to have a chance at competing with Gresley. In that sense, the A2s were practically doomed from the start. The remaining three were built in 1924 and all were given the names of different cities served by the LNER. These being City of Newcastle, City of Kingston upon Hull, City of York, City of Durham, and City of Ripton. While they were still capable of handling express services, management naturally showed favour to Gresley's engines, which had the potential to be developed and improved further, and no more A2s were built as a result. Despite seemingly being built as a means of sticking it to Gresley, he didn't seem to resent the engines, deciding not to cancel the order that had been put in place and going out of his way to modify them and give them A1-style trailing wheels during construction. They were primarily stationed at Gateshead and ran passenger, mail and fast goods services between Grantham and Edinburgh, and occasionally to Leeds. Number 2404 was given a new A1 boiler in 1929 in an attempt to boost the engine's performance, but this required modifying the frames, firebox and footplate. After the rebuild, it was found the engine performed no better, and no more were modified. They were all moved to York in 1934, and by 1936 were all worn out. With the new A4s making waves, the decision was made to start withdrawing the A2s rather than reboiler them, and by 1937 all 5 were taken out of service and scrapped. Gresley's A1s meanwhile were being rebuilt into the more powerful A3 class, and would go on to serve as the basis for many of the other Pacific locomotives that both Edward Thompson and Arthur Peppercorn would produce, both creating their own classes of A2s respectively. Raven's A2s were by no means bad engines. They were more than capable of doing the work they were given and had a relatively long service life, all things considered, but the fact they were more of a last-minute attempt to outshine Gresley's Pacifics than a genuine passion project is what doomed them from the start. Perhaps if Raven's idea of electrification was pursued, we might be singing the praises of his engines instead. But as it stands, let the A2s be a reminder of the importance of keeping up with the times, even if you're already planning for the future. Subscribe for more.